We're spending a bit of time in the Old Testament, certainly. In question 10, we're looking at the life of Noah and seeing how he stands up to our exploration of people that were faithful, people that were not faithful. And we begin to see just how complex understanding salvation can be, how salvation is by faith, not by works, because by works all of us would fail. Salvation is because we put our trust in Christ, that He is our hope, not our own righteousness, you see. And so you have the story of Noah, and you have Noah who's described to us as a man of three things. He's a man of righteousness, a man blameless in his age, in his time, and the fact that he walked with God. What a beautiful picture. He was a man who walked with God. Wherever he went, he was chatting to God in his heart. It's sort of reminiscent of Paul saying, pray without ceasing, walk with God. God is with you every step of the way. You can talk to him, you can walk with him, and you can know his presence, and you can draw upon his wisdom and his strength and just his companionship as you go through life. So this is Noah. I tell you what is interesting in that passage. It says he was righteous in his time. Perhaps that means that there were some cultural things that Noah, like you and I do, had become immune to and are actually quite offensive to God. But for his time, he was finding ways to be pleasing to God. What do I mean by that? I mean, will God perhaps look upon you and me someday and say, how closely did you follow the Sabbath regulations? And we say, oh, well, I wasn't aware that was such a big deal in my time. And in another time, our forebears might look upon us and say, how could you not have known that? So, I'm just saying that in his time, he sought ways to express his love and his confidence and his trust in God. And so he was a man of faith in his time. But then we get to after the flood, and we see this story where he plants, he's a man of the land, so he plants some grapes and immediately grows grapes and makes his wine. Suggests that wine predates, of course, the flood, because this was something that Noah knew. It seems odd to me, if I was planting the first garden in the world, that the first thing I'd plant would be grapes, because it doesn't quite say that, but I'm thinking maybe I'd get some veggies in the ground first and then some fruit trees, and if I had time to grow some grapes, that'd be good. But the picture seems to come out a little bit differently. Maybe that was being a man of his time, and he got himself drunk. No one made him drunk. He got drunk. He was the only one who got drunk, and he lay naked inside his tent, but you get the image that probably the tent wasn't closed. He was just in there naked, in a way that was culturally not appropriate for sons to see their father. Now, in another generation, you might say, well, big deal. But in this culture, it was a big deal for sure. And the brothers knew that. One of them knew it enough to go in and snicker at their dad, and the other two knew it enough to walk in backwards with a cloak over their backs and drop it over their father, so they never had to actually look upon their father naked. And so the next morning, Noah woke up, and we get the impression he knew what had happened, he remembered what had happened, so maybe he wasn't that drunk, but he was drunk enough. And he singled out the son who'd been disrespectful to him, and he brought a curse upon him. And my question is, does that sound like the same Noah as the Noah that's described before the flood? Because in my mind, getting drunk, that was a dubious event. Lying naked when you're drunk, another dubious event. But what really troubles me is that in the next morning when he woke up, he wasn't ashamed for his own behaviour. He was more offended by what his son had done. And so he laid the blame squarely on top of his son's shoulders. How much better would it have been if Noah had gone out and he had found Ham and he said, Ham, I need to talk to you. I'm so sorry I put you in that position last night. I should never have done that. And if Ham had said, Dad, I was really disrespectful in my behaviour as well. And we had had a stronger relationship come out of this. I wonder how much pain and suffering and racism it would have spared our world if Noah had dealt with this better in that circumstance. So that's what I'm wanting you to look at. So we're talking about salvation is by faith, it's not by works. So until the very end, we're told that Noah, because he trusted God, took hold of the righteousness that is by faith. He was a prime example of salvation by faith. And we're told about Esau, who did know about God, but by his behaviour expressed his contempt for God. And so then you've got to say, well, why doesn't that apply to Noah as well? How come Noah's actions are covered, in New Testament terms, covered by the blood, but Esau's is not? And it really brings you back to the concept of faith. What is happening in your heart and mind? You're saved by your faith. Are you doing the best you can, as feeble as it is? And we all make mistakes. We all stumble, but in your heart of hearts, are you loving God and you do anything for God? And I'd like to think that in 2 weeks' time or 2 months' time or 20 years' time or however long, Noah looked back and he's shaking his head and he's saying, I can't believe I was so stupid when that happened with my son. And so there's a lesson there for us to hold salvation by faith, the heart filled with faith, up high, but not to turn it into some form of legalism that says, so it depends on how you act. It depends on what's happening in your heart, always, only, for your salvation, and how it works out in your life is just an example of what's going on inside.